Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. Here are the stories making headlines across the continent. Ballot counting has now begun in Somaliland. A little more than 1 million voters were due to the polls, electing its president and also looking for international recognition for the self-declared republic. Insulting the president and his family in Uganda can get you in serious troubles. 3 people were accused of insulting Yoweri Museveni and spreading false information through TikTok, charges that could lead to several years in prison. And does Gabon need a new constitution? The question will be put before voters in a referendum. They also decide on a text which gives more powers to the head of state while extending the presidential term in office to 7 years. After a 2-year delay, Somaliland finally held its presidential election this Wednesday, and more than 1 million voters were expected to cast their ballots. 3 candidates, including incumbent President Muse Bihi Abdi, are competing for the presidency. This election is crucial for the self-proclaimed country's political future and its ongoing push for international recognition.
You know, it's very important to know that we have to showcase the world the peaceful consistency in Somaliland. We have to showcase the way that we are voting is a democratic process in Somaliland. We have to showcase the world that Somaliland is a government and it deserves to be recognized.
I believe that in the past not many people knew about Somaliland. But in the 7 years Muse has been in office, we've been recognized internationally. I'm confident that if he continues for another 5 years, we will achieve recognition and progress.
And this election is also happening amid Horn of Africa tensions, as our regional correspondent Olivier Bizot explains.
To better understand the context of these elections, it's important to take a brief step back in history. Somaliland was a British protectorate until 1960 when it united with Somalia. But then, after a devastating civil war, Somaliland declared its independence from Somalia in 1991. Since then, it's effectively functioned as a self-governing state. However, to this day, no country in the world has recognised Somaliland. That's a situation that both the incumbent party and the main opposition party are hoping to change. These elections are seen as a main step in that effort.
The more Somaliland continues as a part of democratic elections, the more you have healthy transition and healthy rotation of leadership, the more the world will begin to take Somaliland seriously and say, aha, here is a region in Africa which is producing democratic elections and also leading to a healthy rotation of leadership, and that is a good thing. So yes, there is a link between this democratic path and international recognition.
The stakes are very high for Somaliland's next leader, who will face critical challenges. These include consolidating Somaliland's fragile democracy, which was put to the test by violence and unrest during the postponed 2022 elections. They will also need to boost Somaliland's economy and, of course, continue this push for international recognition. All of that in the face of high regional tension. In early 2024, Somaliland and Ethiopia signed a deal which would give Ethiopia access to Somaliland's ports in exchange for recognition. Now, that deal infuriated Somalia, which still sees Somaliland as part of its territory, and therefore accused Ethiopia of undermining its sovereignty.
Sudan has seen a surge in extreme violence in recent weeks, and there's no political solution in sight for the conflict between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces. Women and girls have been especially impacted, with rape being used as a weapon of war. Last month, RSF fighters attacked villages and towns in eastern Al Jazeera state, and the state health ministry say they sexually assaulted girls and women aged 6 to 60. Shevan Silk.
Sudanese women are on the front lines of a conflict they did not choose. A year and a half into the war between the paramilitary rapid support forces and the regular army, a UN Security Council meeting heard of some of the most extreme violence yet against civilians.
We are receiving reports of horrific violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. including sexual violence committed predominantly against women and girls.
The disturbing reports come from Jazeera State, where RSF fighters went on a rampage last month. They killed dozens of people and targeted women and girls. Witnesses said some women took extreme action to avoid rape.
The shocking accounts of locals confirm that the brutality of rape has sadly forced over 130 women in an unprecedented move to commit mass suicide as an escape from further sexual violence.
Sudan's ambassador to the UN told the briefing the protection of civilians was a priority. But UN officials said both warring parties bore responsibility for violence against the population, saying the Sudanese armed forces are carrying out indiscriminate airstrikes in populated areas and affiliated forces are attacking civilians.
We are deeply concerned by the alarming trajectory of this conflict. While it has already unleashed horrendous suffering, the conditions are there for it to claim exponentially more lives.
UN officials said both sides were being propped up by support and weapons from outside. They're urging the RSF and the Sudanese government to come to the negotiating table to end the war, which has killed more than 24,000 people and created the world's worst displacement crisis. 14 million people, almost a third of the country's population, have been forced from their homes.
In Uganda, 2 young influencers were arrested this week by the authorities, and another was found guilty this Wednesday. All are accused of insulting President Yoweri Museveni and his family and spreading false information about leaders through TikTok videos. And these charges could lead to several years in prison. Last September, the Ugandan policy publicly reminded that insults against the president and his entourage constitute an offence. Details from Clément Diroma.
2 TikTok influencers aged 21 and 28 were arrested this week and imprisoned while awaiting trial for hate speech and spreading false information. These influencers are accused of mocking and insulting President Yoweri Museveni, his wife and his son, the army chief, as well as several members of the ruling party. A magistrate from the Entebbe court, who convicted another influencer on similar grounds this Wednesday, stated that they aimed to tarnish the leader's image and incite public hostility through their videos. The 2 will be tried on November 18th alongside a third accused aged 19. They've asserted their innocence but could receive sentences of several years in prison. Last July, Edward Awebwa, 24, was sentenced to 6 years in detention for insulting the presidential family on TikTok. This had sparked numerous condemnations from human rights NGOs who regularly criticize Uganda for its attacks on freedom of expression.
And in other news, a Médecins Sans Frontières team in DR Congo was the victim of an armed robbery. It happened in Masisi territory in the east of the country. There were no injuries, but the NGO says that its staff is shocked and that such attacks on medical workers are unacceptable. For more than 2 years, the area has been the scene of regular clashes between the Congolese armed forces, supported by local armed groups, and the M23 rebels, backed by Rwanda. To Mauritius now, where former Prime Minister Navin Ramgoolam was sworn in for his 3rd stint as Prime Minister. It follows his 4-parties coalition resounding victory in Sunday's general elections. The opposition Alliance of Change won 60 of the 64 seats in Parliament. Ramgoolam has pledged to reduce the high cost of living Mauritians are facing, despite economic growth in the country. And a scandal in the world of South African football. The president of its federation, Danny Jordan, has been released on bail amid allegations he used the organization's funds for personal gain. Jordan is alleged to have hired a private security company for his personal protection and a public relations company without authorizations from the SAFA board. He was arrested on Wednesday. SAFA president since 2013, he was a key figure in bringing the 2010 FIFA World Cup to South Africa. Now, should the constitution of Gabon be modified? In a few days, citizens will be able to answer that question in a referendum. Voters will be required to decide on a text which gives more powers to the head of state while extending the presidential term in office to 7 years. The new constitution clauses will also toughen the eligibility criteria for the Supreme Office. Indira Ayuk reports.
As the 16th of November draws closer, Gabonese are getting set to cast their ballots in a decisive referendum. At this university campus in the capital, Libreville, many are not impressed with the draft constitution in circulation.
I will vote against it. I've read the Constitution, and there are points that I don't like, including the 7-year mandate of the president. For me, it's too much. The president would have too much power. In a country which claims to be democratic, it's not good to have a president with too much power.
It is a different atmosphere at this market in the Gabonese capital. Here, volunteers of the Éveil to Gabon network are out for field campaigns. The network, which is close to the current regime, is urging people to vote in favor of the constitutional amendment.
It is not the matter of an individual or of a legislative or presidential election. It is about the new beginning of our republic, of our Gabon. We must fight so that the yes wins with 95%.
The debate about the proposed constitution is dividing public opinion. Critics denounce the lack of separation of powers and even the eligibility criteria for the presidency of the republic as contained in the new document. According to political analyst Lisiane Neyer, the regime should have focused on other issues like deliberating on the appointment of members of the Constitutional Council, which is currently problematic.
The problem is that we did not agree from the beginning. Instead, we rushed to have a national dialogue so that everyone could give their opinions, and the entire approach was biased.
The November 16 referendum in Gabon is a decisive step in the transition process, which will end with the organization of presidential elections in August 2025.
In the northern Senegalese region of Matam, a recent series of floods have destroyed hundreds of acres of farmland and its crops. The government has pledged to help, but for now, residents have seen few results and must bide their time. This as the country gears up for legislative elections on November 17th. Laurent Berstecher has the story.
Forced to flee her home after the Senegal River burst its banks last month, Kardiatou Sy says she's received no help and feels abandoned by the state.
Si ton chat est détruit, tu vas nous quoi? On n'a pas de quoi nourrir. On n'a pas vu l'État.
Since mid-October, a series of flash floods in Senegal's northeastern Matam region have displaced thousands of people, submerged acres of farmland, and destroyed valuable crops. A disaster for the region, where nearly 80% of the population is unemployed and where already limited opportunities have been swept away.
Our children have no work. They either sit at home or they're out in the fields. And now that the fields have been destroyed, the government must act quickly.
Senegalese authorities recently pledged some 12 million euros in aid to help flood-affected areas, a package that should come on top of an ambitious development plan for the Matam region announced by Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko last week.
We want to create an industrial hub in Matam. All the phosphorus extracted will be transformed into fertilizer here. The installation and development phase alone will generate 10,000 direct jobs.
The government will hope these pledges are enough to convince voters in the Matam region as Senegal heads to the polls next week for early legislative elections.
And this report concludes our edition. On behalf of the Eye on Africa team, thank you for watching and stay tuned to France 24.